Welcome to the Storyteller's Moon, a place where every tale carries you into a world of passion, mystery, and unforgettable emotion. This story will pull you in, so find a quiet corner, let your heart open, and step into the journey.
The girl at the foot of the bed. I woke up because something finished the sentence I was dreaming. I hadn't been dreaming of words, only of weight, the heavy lid of sleep pressing me down, when a breath grazed my ankles and a sound shaped itself at the end of my bed. It wasn't a voice exactly. It was what happens to the air when a mouth decides to exist. I kept my eyes closed, as if that might keep the room from noticing me back. My name slipped across the cotton of my sheets, petty and patient, like water finding a crack. Nia. My mother named me Nia Monroe, because she said a name should be a map. It means purpose. At 3:08 a.m., purpose felt like a trapdoor. The house didn't creak. It remembered itself. The old wood resumed being the old wood. The vent resumed sighing. And the night settled around my ribs like a wet coat. I counted to 5, small bravery, palm-sized, and opened my eyes. She was at the foot of the bed, not pressed to the mattress, not perched on the chest, like in the stories my cousin Joel swears are true. She stood on the rug, like her feet were learning about floors for the first time, hands loose at her sides, dress hanging in a way that said someone else picked it for her. The hallway light I'd left on fed a dim stripe through the doorway and caught enough of her shape to give my terror detail. Hair in 2 uneven braids, bare knees, a hem that ended above the shin and made her look older and younger at once. She was the size of a 10-year-old. The room decided she was 10. She didn't move. The room didn't move. Only my heart. Auditioning for a part that required running. Then she did something that was worse than growling or screaming or anything I can confess to believing in. She smiled like she'd already been here. My mouth tried to decide between prayer and profanity. What came out was a whisper that surprised even me with its softness. "Baby," I said. "Where are your people?" "Here," she said. The syllable came like a mistake the air made. I reached for my phone, not to film. What kind of fool has reflexes that dumb at 3 a.m.? But to make a square of light in a room that had chosen its darkness. The screen stuttered my face back at me, wide-eyed, bonnet tilted. I glanced at the time, 3:09. When I looked back, the girl was closer. No sound, no step. Half a foot shaved off the space as if a seam had tightened. My skin broke into a field of small alarms. "What do you want?" I asked, forgetting every trick of pretending I wasn't scared. She tipped her head. The braids swayed. When she spoke again, the sound made the ceiling feel too low. "You," she said, and then quieter, as if practicing the word, "Nia." My name in her mouth wasn't my name. It was a key she wasn't sure turned anything. I had the sudden terrible thought that if I covered my feet with the blanket, she'd slip a hand under to curl around an ankle, and I would go where people only go when they forget they're alive. I kept my feet still, like they were under a microscope. "I don't know you," I said. "You can't." The smile left. Her face rearranged itself, around an old sadness and a very young hunger. I've been here, she said, and the room knew it was true. The hallway light shivered and then steadied. I thought, absurdly, of how my Aunt Loretta had told me on moving day that the bulb in that fixture was temperamental, as if electricity had moods. I thought of Aunt Loretta's voice saying, "Make yourself at home, baby," and wondered whether this was the house agreeing or the house keeping a promise to someone else. The girl was nearer, 3 feet now. At the foot of the bed means at the foot of you. "Don't," I said. The word came out like an apology. "Please don't." "Nia," she said. And something that belonged to the house reached up from the floor and peered through my name like a peephole. My breath hitched. I had the feeling I get when I stand in church and everyone knows the song, but me. I reached for the lamp. The lamp clacked. Light poured over the covers. The girl vanished like she'd been waiting for me to make that mistake. The room stood there, pretending it had always been a room. I didn't sleep again. Morning sat across from me and watched me learn how to breathe with the lamp on. How I came to be here. Aunt Loretta, my mother's big sister, went into the hospital at the start of June with a heart that acted like a toddler in the cereal aisle. She came out with a dozen pills and a command for me to try the old place. The old place is this 2-bedroom shotgun in Eastfield, bought by my grandparents on a handshake and a scowl. Wallpaper like the inside of a teacup. Floorboards that remember everything. My mother would have moved me in herself if she were not a voice on voicemail and a stack of photos. My mother, who could walk into a room and make light look like it had assumed the wrong shape. She went quiet when I was 16, and the quiet kept. Grief is a room with the lamp turned off. You relearn the furniture by stubbing your toes. I agreed, because Aunt Loretta is the kind of woman who will tell you the truth even when it behaves. "It's a good house," she said, when I signed the lease that isn't really a lease. "It doesn't like being empty." "I don't like being empty either," I said. She loved that. "Speak on it." The first 2 weeks were ordinary. The kitchen sink learned my name. The neighbors decided my porch was worth nodding at. The trains painted the night with long sounds. I unpacked slow, because everything about me is slower than I pretend. I hung my mother's mirror, the oval one with the little silver chip at the edge, at the end of the hallway, where the light comes through and makes a person look forgiven. Sometimes that mirror showed me a coat passing behind me when my hands were full of laundry. Sometimes it held my face like a photograph you discover on purpose. Once, late brushing my teeth, I thought a second head sat just below my left shoulder. And then it was toothpaste. It was glare. It was the kind of imagination you have to walk like a dog or it will eat the couch. On day 15, I found a small frayed ribbon in the closet of the second bedroom. Pale yellow. It looked like it had belonged to a child's dress. I shut the door, as if I was ignoring a cough. Night 19 was the first time she came to stand at the foot of my bed. After I made it to morning without dying, I did the bravest thing I know how to do. I called Joel. He's my cousin, the one people call when you need a ride from a place you shouldn't have been. And the one you avoid at cookouts because he collects stories like they owe him money. I told him what I could say, without screaming. He listened with the kind of silence that feels like someone pressing a warm hand to your back. So, you saw a girl, he said, at the foot of the bed. I saw something shaped like a girl who knew my name. You sure it wasn't sleep paralysis? Folks wake up, can't move, swear there's a hag sitting on their chest. She wasn't on my chest, I said. She was on the rug. And if she sat anywhere, it was on the air. You crack jokes when you're scared, he said, which made me want to hang up. I'm not cracking jokes. I lied. Joel has rules. Not the don't call your ex kind. The kind that sound like your grandmother's recipes for living and get passed down in whispers when no one else is around. Don't whistle after dark. Don't turn your back on the water when it says your name. Don't pretend you didn't see the thing you saw. Aight, he said. Here's what you do. You don't call her baby again. Names matter. Baby belongs to you. And any child you might one day have, you don't rent it out. You keep the hallway light on, but not the lamp, and if you feel breath on your ankles, pull your feet up and say, not mine. You have salt in the house? The kind that comes in a blue container and feels like shame when you use it to salt pasta. Good. You'll put a little line of it across the footboard. I don't have a footboard. Get creative. Tape it to the end of the bed if you have to. And Nia, don't ask her questions. Why not? I said, and immediately regretted it. Because you don't want to know what she thinks the answer is? I did the Saul thing, drawing a chalk-like streak along the end of the mattress, where my toes tented the sheets. I left the hallway light on and the lamp off. I drank half a glass of water and poured the rest into the sink, because my mother once told me never to leave a cup by the bed at night unless you wanted to invite thirsty things. When sleep came, it came like a compromise. At 3:11, the house pressed a finger to my lips. At 3:13, the air said my name like a question. I kept my eyes closed and said, not mine. The breath near my ankles cooled like a shadow being pulled off a lake. For a moment, too, I believed in the foolish little boundary a dash of salt could draw against the dark. Then something heavy leaned against the mattress, and the bed moved half an inch toward the door. The line of salt didn't smear. The girl didn't cross it. But she put her weight to it and found the give. Nia, she said. Not a question. A promise. I slept with my knees up, my body a small house on stilts. The next afternoon, I swept my porch because sweeping calms me, where my brain starts inventorying disasters. Miss Loretta from next door pretended to be checking her hibiscus, but really, she was worried about me, in the way that requires plants to be involved. She's been on this block long enough to remember when the street names were Paint and Adair. You tell me the truth, she said, and I'll pretend to be surprised. I had a visitor, I said. Her mouth made an I knew it twist. At your feet? I nodded. A little girl. Didn't look sick. Didn't look alive. Polite. She asked, like that mattered. She said my name. That's rude, Miss Loretta said, and pulled a clothespin out of nowhere like a magician. Children used to be raised not to take what isn't theirs. Names are something you keep on a plate. You ever see her? I asked. She shook her head. Not me. But the lady who had your place before you, Shanice, her grandbaby Amari, sleepwalked and started waking up at the end of the bed. Said there was a girl there who didn't know how to blink. That's too many details, I said. And Miss Loretta patted my arm like the world patted the shoulder of a child who just realized it's big. Some folks say the old St. Bridget's home for the wayward girls used to sit where the park is now, back where the trees pretend to be old. They moved the bodies, but forgot to remind the ghosts. She adjusted her scarf. You look like your mama when you worry. She'd say, I shouldn't feed the story. I said. Stories are going to eat, Miss Loretta said, whether you feed them or not. Any advice? Don't give her anything, she said. Not your name, not your food, not your good blanket. If she asks for something, you give her what's in your hand, if what's in your hand is nothing. She smiled at the look on my face. You laugh, but nothing is a real gift if you give it right. Miss Loretta, that's a poem. I know it is, she said, and went back to her hibiscus, like she hadn't just handed me a lantern. That night, I put the salt on the mattress again, even though the girl had proven she could move the bed like a suggestion. I kept my feet up and my hands empty. I practiced saying no without sounding like a cop. At 3:07, I woke to the hum of the fridge, sounding like it was singing through teeth. At 3:12, the hallway light flickered like a thought. At 3:13, the girl was there again, the space between us, the length of a borrowed word. Nia, she said. And it wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. Or it had been long enough. I didn't answer. I made my mouth a small fist and held it closed. She stepped, no sound. And the bed slid half an inch again, groaning like it had knees. Nia, she said, and there was something else in it this time. Not hunger, not anger. Endless practice. Like the way a kid says the alphabet all the way to LMNOP because they like the way it feels. Not mine, I said, calm like a lie. The hallway light steadied. She did not. She tilted her head, and so slow I almost missed it. She lifted one foot and set it on the edge of the mattress, toes curling like she had just learned toes could curl. Don't, I said. And there it was. A tremor of anger. I hadn't wanted to give her anything. I gave her that. She smiled without teeth. She put her foot back on the rug. She put her palms flat to the end of the bed and pushed. The bed crept. The salt line held like stubbornness. I didn't blink for a long time. When the clock slid toward 3:20, the weight at the foot of the bed softened, and the house remembered morning was a thing that happened. I sat up, and my back made a sound like an old door closing. I went to the kitchen and made coffee like it was armor. On the table, something waited that had not been there when I went to bed. A small, pale yellow ribbon, frayed. My hands did not shake. My hands put the ribbon in a drawer and shut it. My hands learned another thing to do with fear. My mother's mirror at the end of the hallway is a simple thing. Glass, wood, a smudge where silver met air and lost. It's one of those objects that seems to remember the faces it holds. I tell myself that because it makes me feel accompanied, not haunted. On the fourth night, I saw her in the mirror first. Not beside me, not at the foot of the bed in the raw meat of seeing. Only the shape of her where the hallway makes a throat. Standing in the glass, but not reflected. More like the mirror knew a shape I did not, and decided to share. I approached the way you approach a wild dog you might still trust. Hand out, palm down, body making itself into the least threatening furniture. The mirror accepted my reflection like it was taking attendance. Behind me, in the glass, the bedroom yawned open, and the bed sat there, with the sheets I had learned to tuck under my feet. At the foot, no one. In the reflection, the small, patient figure of a girl looking past my shoulder. At the life that kept happening without her. I did the worst possible thing. I spoke to the mirror. Who are you? She didn't move. The glass answered for her by showing me my own mouth moving and my face making shapes around fear. Then the mirror winked, not like the flirty wink a person gives to an idea, but the way old glass flickers when something else leans in behind it. I saw a room that wasn't mine. A bed with metal rails, a window with wire, a pile of dresses folded like apologies on a chair, a hand, adult, ringed, pinning hair into 2 breathing braids, a ribbon, pale as a weak sun. Kenya. A voice in the mirror said, not my voice. The girl's head tilted, the way crows tilt at shiny things. Kenya, baby, sit still. The ring flashed. The braid tightened. The girl winced without making a mouth of it. Kenya, not Nia, but close enough to catch like a fish hook. Don't call me baby, the girl in the mirror said. And the woman behind her laughed like a door chain. The scene tugged back out of reach. The mirror giving me my own face again. I shook like cold had invented me. Joel answered the phone on the second ring. You okay? She was in the mirror, I said. Or the mirror was in her. Which one is it? Yes, I said. Her name might be Kenya. You sure it ain't the mirror showing you whatever it wants to show you, so you'll give it attention like it pays rent? Joel? I said. I know. The sound of him breathing like a reasonable person soothed the wrong parts of me. If you got her name, don't use it. Not unless she gives it to you with a gift you can keep. What kind of gift? The kind that stays. He said. The kind that makes a shape in the morning. Like a ribbon on the table? He went quiet. She left you one? Yes. Where is it? In a drawer. Throw it out. I opened the drawer, picked up the pale length of fabric, and felt the room lean closer to hear my choice. I threw it away. That night, I slept without salt, like a dare. At 3:13, the bed moved anyway. You can be scared and still be yourself. You can be terrified and still have the dumb human impulse to make a joke to keep from crying. I allowed myself to. The first came when I went to Brielle's to borrow her step stool, because I decided to replace the hallway bulb for one that doesn't mood. Brielle is the kind of friend who will watch a horror film with the sound off and still tell the characters to move smarter. She's standing at your feet and you're worried about lighting. She said, "If a ghost is going to catch me," I said, settling the stool, "it won't be because my edges were unattended." I tapped my satin bonnet. I sleep prepared. Brielle laughed so hard she had to hold the wall. "Girl, if I die and see you in a bonnet at my funeral, I'm haunting you with a hot comb." The second joke was only half a joke. I went to bed with cotton socks on. When I felt breath at my ankles, I whispered into the dark, "I pay utilities." Because if the house was going to share its amenities with the dead, I wanted credit. The dog did not laugh. The girl did not either. But I did. Once. Quietly. Like letting a little air out of something that could have burst. And that was it. Humor had served its purpose. The rest of the night belonged to the thing that pressed its patient weight against the end of the bed and taught my fear how to count backwards. There's a room in the public library with a glass door labeled Local History, and a librarian named Mr. Green who wears sweaters that look like his wife promises to love him anyway. I went there on a Wednesday when the sun had the nerve to shine. "I'm looking for information on St. Bridget's home," I said. "It was for girls." He nodded the way people do when they inherit a town's sins, along with its parking tickets. "Closed in 1987, he said. "A lot of institutions did." He typed without looking down. "We've got a ledger." He led me to a table and set down a book, thick with the dust of decisions. The cover read St. Bridget's Register, in a hand that wanted to be responsible for everything. Inside, columns, date of intake, name, age, reason, notes. The reasons were the kinds of words people use when they mean poor or inconvenient. Wayward, unmanageable, no family, incorrigible, placed by court, mother absent, father unknown. My finger found what it would have found, whether I wanted it or not. Kenya Lake, 10. Reason, incorrigible. Notes, night disturbances. There was a grainy photocopy stapled to the back, a list stacked up at City Hall. Missing, Kenya Lake, age 10, last seen. A date smudged a week after the note about night disturbances. The picture, too grey to be useful, still held the echo of 2 uneven braids. The file ended there. No found, no body, no waking. People go missing, Mr. Green said gently, which is what he must say to genealogy hobbyists hoping their great-grandfathers did anything but die. But they keep going, I said, a little too loud. He selected a more private tone. Do you live near the old campus? close enough. He did that thing where someone looks at your hands to see if they're shaking and pretends to be reading a label instead. Churches used to ring bells for souls, he said, apropos of nothing, to remind them they had a place to be. We ring phones and microwaves now. I don't think the microwave will help. You'd be surprised what persists, he said. On the way home, I bought a bell anyway. Small, brass, serious. Not because I believe in cures, because I believe in rituals that give your fear a chore. That night, I put the bell on the nightstand. I told myself I would not touch it unless the house asked for it. At 3:13, the bed scraped forward the length of a sigh. The girl exhaled at the foot of my bed, and the room cooled around my ankles. I did not touch the bell. I watched the shadow shape of her, barely darker than the dark. I watched the hallway light hold like a very old hand. I watched the mirror at the end of the hall do nothing, which was its kindness. Kenya? I didn't say. Instead, I said, not mine. The bed held. The night counted to 5 and remembered morning again. The bell stayed still. You learn rules by stepping on them. I learned that the girl at the foot of the bed did not like closed doors. On the 7th night, I closed my bedroom door because the hallway felt like a throat, and I didn't want the house swallowing my sleep. The door had stuck the day I moved in, and had a habit of unsticking when the weather felt nosy. I turned the knob, set the wedge, and told myself I had invented privacy. At 3:13, the knob turned itself. A click, delicate as a nail being admired. The wedge slid an inch, like a shoe being towed off. The door opened just enough for the hallway light to put its thin fingers on the rug. She stood there, the door making a frame for a picture. The bed moved. Not because she pushed it, because the house leaned. Because whatever was practicing being her needed a degree more of me. I sat up and put my feet flat on the mattress and said, no. It's amazing how much of your life you can say no to, and how much will continue anyway. The door opened wider. The hallway poured in like water. The mirror at the end tipped its face to watch. Her breath found my ankles. Nia, she said, like a friend who forgot you weren't one. I picked up the bell. Don't. I told myself. I wished I had a rule book that wasn't made of other people's grandmothers. I wished my mother would wake up for 5 minutes and tell me the difference between inviting and acknowledging. I wish the world believed me when I said I wasn't brave. I was only here. The bell was heavier than it deserved to be. I set it down. I gave her nothing. The night creaked through its joints and let a colder hour sit down. By 3:20, the door had swung wider on its own hinges, and the bed had crept an inch closer to a corner of the rug that had never been that interesting. I started to imagine the picture of the room pulled just out of True. Frame bent, patience bending it further. Morning found me awake, which is sometimes what survival feels like. I opened the door all the way and said, fine. If she wanted a frame, she would have to make one from my permission instead of my fear. Miss Loretta approved when I told her. Don't give a child a thing to push on, she said. They'll think you invented obstacles for sport. What should I give her? Your back, she said. Let her see you move through a house. Let her learn the shape of leaving. The weather broke like a plate. The day went from hot to gone, and the sky braided itself into something dark enough to be an answer. Rain started at midnight. By 1, the street was a whispering river. The electricity blinked once, remembered my bills, and held. I slept like a person resting in a mouth. At 3:13, time has manners, the girl was there. The bed moved a half-inch. The rain should have drowned thin sounds, but the house was determined to let this one through. I pulled my knees up and listened to the shape of breath. Ken. I did not say. My name in her mouth arrived anyway. Nia? She said, eager now, like I was a word she could not wait to write on every surface in the house. Naya, Naya. The bell on the nightstand vibrated without ringing, as if sound were a person who had decided to hold their breath. I decided to talk. Not because I thought conversation would save me, because silence felt like feeding. What do you want? I asked, careful with the spoon of my voice. Up, she said, and the bed shivered like it had heard a dog command. Up. No, I said. The rain made the roof sound close. Somewhere, a gutter cleared its throat. The house remembered water and all the ways a tree makes wood. The girl put her hand on the mattress. Barely an imprint, barely pressure. The sock on my left foot dampened with cold, where she didn't touch me. I thought of rivers that remember faces. Up, she said again, this time with the patient menace of a parent who has all day. What happens if I say yes? I asked before I could stop myself. The room agreed to a new shape of quiet. Even the rain widened to listen. Then you see, she said. Something about the way she said see made my eyes water like an allergy. I should not have asked questions. I had asked one anyway, and it had given me an answer with a mouth. I said nothing else. I curled my feet under me and held still, as if a predator were deciding whether I was edible. The bed did not move again, but the house did, rebalancing itself around the choice I hadn't made. By morning, the ribbon I had thrown away was on the kitchen table again. Pale yellow, frayed, wet. I called Joel and did not cry, and told him I had done something brave. Not ringing a bell counts. He told me bravery is a budget, and I should spend it slow. Then he said, "Bring that ribbon to me. Don't touch it with your hands." I wrapped it in a grocery bag and took it 2 blocks like it might bite. Joel held it with tongs and put it in a jar like a county fair exhibit. "You keep her gifts, she keeps your company," he said. "We'll give it back when we know the terms." "What are the terms?" "Girl," he said. "If I knew the terms, I'd be rich. There's a small dip at the end of my bed, where the weight of human concern makes a dent. On the 9th morning, a footprint sat there, bare, small, as if dust had remembered her feet. I stared at it the way you stare at a bruise to decide if it belongs to you. I didn't touch it. I didn't take a picture. I made oatmeal like the world can be reasonable with enough oats. At lunch, Pastor Denise stopped by because Miss Loretta had told her I looked peaked, which is Southern for when she smiled, her teeth didn't. Pastor Denise has the kind of presence that makes your house behave the way your living room behaves when you bring out the good candles. You sleeping okay? She asked. I'm becoming acquainted with the negotiations of night. That's a no. That's the word, I said. She didn't offer to pray out loud. She sat with me at the table and put her palm flat to the wood. There are always 3 stories, she said. What happened? What people say happened? What keeps happening? I can handle the first 2. You can't, she said kindly. And you shouldn't have to. She looked toward the hall, toward the mirror, toward the room that had begun to lean. Some souls don't know how to be done. That girl, if she's a girl, didn't get the right goodbye. They said she was incorrigible. Ledger said so. Which is how people spell inconvenient when they want to sound official. She sighed. I can come by tonight. I don't need a ghostbuster, I said. And then, because my mouth betrays me, I need a bedtime. Pastor Denise laughed. Soft, like a prayer, becoming a joke because it loves you. I'll drop off one of Sister Myra's quilts, she said. Folks sleep under it and wake up under it. That's something. The quilt came patchwork and practical, squares like a lesson in staying. I spread it over my regular blanket, like a promise. At 3:13, the bed moved, and the quilt didn't. She stood there, inches from the edge, hands flat, head tilted, braids making shadow apostrophes on the wall. I had the wild thought that if I reached out and touched her hair, my hand would come away, with dust shaped like grief. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The quilt held me like a voice, saying stay. At 3:20, she unlearned standing and evaporated the way wet air decides to be a window. I slept from 3:21 to 6:07. When I woke, the quilt smelled like a women's luncheon and rain. On the 10th night, I broke my own rule and put 1 foot over the edge of the bed to see if courage is a thing you can plant like a flag. The air under the bed is colder than the rest of the room, not because of physics, but because no one believes in physics at 3 a.m. My toes dangled for the length of a heartbeat, and the world leaned toward them like a question. The girl did not appear. The bed did not move. The house did not announce anything. For one breath, I believed everything had ended, that the night had spent itself on me and found me uninteresting. Then a hand, not cold, not warm, closed around my ankle and squeezed the way a child squeezes a mother's hand when crossing a street. I hissed and snatched my foot back into civilization. I did not say anything I had to repent for. I did not cry. But my heart climbed a staircase and forgot what floor it had aimed for. I looked at the end of the bed. She was there. The mirror at the end of the hall showed us both. Me with my knees up like a kid who dreams of boats. Her with her hands not quite touching the quilt, because Sister Myra's prayers are petty in all the right ways. Up, she said. Softer. As if I had done something right by doing something wrong. No, I said. Not mine. What's yours? She asked. It was the first real question she had asked. Her voice was less echo, more curiosity. Dangerous precisely because it sounded like a child. Children mean everything they say. My name, I said. My bed. My morning. In the mirror, something like a smile crossed her face. That wasn't the earlier smile, the one that said she would borrow the shape of me and wear it out. The smile said, I remember. Morning, she repeated, like a word you get to keep only if you say it with someone. She stepped back, and the bed stayed where it was, and the house remembered being a house. At 3:18, I slept because my bones decided they lived, and my thoughts just worked there. It would make a tidy story if I told you I rang the bell and the ghost dissolved, or I learned the right prayer and the night learned manners. What happened was messier, and therefore truer. I gave her nothing that had weight. I gave her no name but mine, and I used it only for me. I did not feed her. The once, on the 12th night, I left a glass of water by accident and woke to find the glass empty and a wet circle on the table the size of an apology. I kept the door open. I draped Sister Mira's quilt because stubbornness needs something warm to be wrapped in. I replaced the hallway bulb and kept the mirror clean with vinegar because respect is a boundary too. I read the ledger of girls again and again to make sure Kenya Lake had not changed her mind about being dead. I visited the park where St. Bridget's had been and stood under a tree that had been a window once. And I whispered, I see you, without saying to whom. The girl came each night at 3:13 to put her hands on the foot of my bed and push, to breathe on my ankles like a tide becoming land, to say my name like a door. And each night I said, not mine, until it tasted like a lullaby. Sometimes she said up, and I said, no. And more she said, morning, as if practicing the shape of leaving. On the 19th night, she brought something and left it where the salt had once been. 3 pebbles, smooth as lips. I put them on the windowsill because pebbles belong to light in the day and dark at night. In the morning, 1 pebble was gone. I like to think the house ate it, greedy for small things that can be kept. On the 22nd night, the bed did not move. She stood at the foot and looked at me like she had learned a new rule and was deciding whether to accept it. The mirror at the end of the hall showed us both again, and this time, behind her, a room with metal rails and wire in the window appeared and then, slow as old film warming, dissolved. The woman with the ring did not come back. The braids looked looser, the ends unraveling to something like hair. On the 24th night, she did the thing I had been afraid of since the first time I saw her. She smiled like she knew a joke. Morning, she said at 3:14, daring time to be late. Morning, I said back. And some time later, I noticed I had fallen asleep, with my feet nearly touching the edge of the bed, as if rules work both ways. On the 30th night, she did not come. I woke in a panic, as if joy were an absence you had to chase. I checked the hallway light. I checked the mirror. I checked the rug for dust footprints and found only rug. I went to the kitchen and poured water and did not look at the table where once a ribbon had appeared. The house felt as heavy as ever, but my fear was light enough to carry in one hand. I knocked on Miss Loretta's door at a decent hour. "She's gone?" she said, more than asked. "I think she left," I said. "She'll be back," Miss Loretta said, not unkindly. "They always come back to see whether you noticed." She put a jar of peach preserves in my palm. "Feed somebody living. That helps." I fed Brielle on biscuits and almost laughed her. I rang the bell once at noon to see what it felt like to make a clean sound on purpose. It sounded like a door agreeing to be a door. At 3:13 that night, the bed did not move. A breath did not touch my ankles. The mirror showed me only me, which is another kind of haunting. I slept. Weeks later, when the summer was sliding toward the smell of school supplies, Joel came over with the jar that held the ribbon. He set it on my table with the reverence you save for babies and police. "You keep it?" I asked. He shook his head. "I brought it back. It's not ours to keep." We took it to the park where St. Bridget's had been, and where now swings squeal like gossip. We chose a tree that had lived through more weather than we owed it. We dug until the earth said, "That's enough," and put the jar down in the small mouth we'd made. We did not pray. We did not say her name. We stood there while a breeze picked up, and the leaves applauded old ghosts for remembering new tricks. On the way home, I bought a second quilt from Sister Myra. Not because I needed to, but because someone else would. I told Pastor Denise I didn't need a blessing, and she blessed me with a smile anyway. That night, I got in bed with the window open. The night had decided to be kind. Trains distant but not scolding. Crickets performing like they'd practiced. I put my feet close to the edge. When I felt air at my ankles, it was only air. I said, "Morning," into the dark, just to see what my mouth would do. It did what mouths do when they have learned the shape of surviving. It made a word that belongs to whoever is there to say it. I slept with the bell on the nightstand and did not touch it. You don't get endings, you get revisions. On a Saturday in September, I woke at 3:13, because you always will, once you have enough nights in that slot. I lay there in the friendly dark, with my feet an inch from the edge, and my hands arranged like someone about to be told a secret. She was there. Not like the first time. Not the same weight, not the same insistence. At the foot of the bed, like a memory of a habit. Hands at her sides, braids neater. Dress new, or the idea of newness wearing a dress. The hallway light behaved itself and drew a plain stripe across the rug. The mirror at the end of the hall offered me myself and a small patient figure that had learned to be pictures without needing to be a warning. She didn't push. She didn't speak my name. She looked at my feet, not hungry now, and at the quilt that would be warm long after I was gone. And at the wall where, if you squinted, you could see a patch lighter than the rest where something once hung. A cross? A calendar? A word that kept time. Then she smiled, and this time it was a child's smile, which is to say, it was bigger than the room. Morning. she said. I didn't whisper. I didn't practice caution at the edge of my own bed. I said, "Morning," like a person who had not died from saying it. She stepped back the smallest step. Behind her, for the first time, I saw not the bed in the mirror, nor the metal rails of a room that wasn't mine, but the shape of a hallway that opened toward nothing, the way a path looks when it remembers it leads to a field. I thought of my mother's mirror, holding faces until they learn their shape, of Miss Loretta's hibiscus sassing summer, of Joel's jar in the earth, of Pastor Denise's squares keeping heat like a secret. She lifted a hand as if to wave, but it wasn't a wave. It was the first part of reaching out and the last part of letting go. She brought that hand to her hair and smoothed a braid like an older sister would, like a mother would, like you do when you're about to be seen by someone you deserve. Then she was not there. The air held the dent her absence made. At 3:20, I fell back asleep and dreamed of a park where swings don't squeal anymore because they had their say and are tired. You will ask if I'm sure. About Kenya. About St. Bridget's. About whether I was sleep-paralyzed by a grief that never learned to stop talking. I'm sure of this. There was a girl at the foot of my bed who wanted me to see, and to get up, and to be mourning, and to give away what was mine, so she could have what wasn't. I didn't. I didn't give myself. I didn't give what had weight. I gave her the patience of a light left on, and the respect of a quilt, and ultimately the smallest ceremony, a jar in dirt, and the unromantic bravery of not using a name that did not belong to me. It isn't victory. It's a life. Sometimes I find a pebble on the windowsill I don't remember leaving. Sometimes I wake at 3:13 to the kind of quiet that is a hand on your shoulder saying, "Keep sleeping." Once I found a footprint at the end of the bed again, so faint the day took it back by noon. I let the door stay open. I keep the mirror clean. I don't whistle after dark. I feed people who can say thank you. And if I feel breath at my ankles now, I say, not mine, but I say it gentler, like a mother teaching a child that no can be a kind word if you put it on the right plate. When folks ask why I didn't move, I could talk about rent, about how the house held my name like a story it was willing to say right, about how Joel would clown me for leaving a perfectly good floor plan to a dead girl with boundary issues. I could remind them that running only looks like a solution from the outside. What I say is this: it's a good house. It doesn't like being empty. If you sleep here, and I don't recommend it, you'll wake at 3:13 and think you heard your name. Maybe you did. Maybe the house is practicing. Maybe a child who learned the alphabet all the way to morning is counting you. Either way, keep your feet under the quilt. Keep your hands empty unless what you're holding is nothing. And if she stands at the foot of your bed, don't give her what isn't hers. Give her your attention, like a bell that rings itself. Then keep your name. Keep your morning. Keep your purpose. That's all a map is. A way back to the living. A path you say out loud, so the air knows who to answer. Brielle didn't believe me in the way friends are allowed not to, because they believe in you. She arrived with a duffel, a flashlight that could interrogate the moon, and a sweatshirt that said, I do not consent in letters big enough to be a policy. No jokes, I warned. She doesn't seem to like laughter. Brielle's mouth made the shape of a joke and then folded it away. I'll witness, she said. You stand where you stand. We laid Sister Myra's quilt over both of us, like a treaty, and left the door open so the hallway could perform its thin blessing. Brielle curled on her side, facing the foot of the bed. Her hand bracketed around the flashlight she promised not to use. I lay there with my hands open, palms up, like I was offering nothing correctly. The house did what it does. Midnight to 1, 1 to 2. At 3:12, the air breathed through its teeth. At 3:13, the bed remembered, wheels it didn't have. Brielle inhaled sharp and small. She whispered, then swallowed the rest like a seed. The girl stood at the foot, as if we had drawn her there with the geometry of fear. Hands at her sides, head tipped, braids making the punctuation marks of a story that was never proofread. The mirror showed 3 figures, me, Brielle, and something that wanted to be a child so badly it had become practice itself. Nia, she said, and Brielle flinched, as if the sound moved through bone first and air second. Brielle did not reach for the flashlight. She did not break her promise. She said, barely sound, I hear you. The girl turned her face toward Brielle without turning her body, as if the body were the last part she had learned. And the hallway light dimmed in the same half-inch the bed crept. Don't give her your name. I breathed. Brielle nodded. She kept her mouth closed like a stitched pocket. The girl waited. The waiting had weight. I understood suddenly that she had practiced patience in rooms with metal rails and a bell that never rang, and that she was better at it than living people. Nia? She said again, and the bed lurched a thumb's breadth. The quilt did not slide. The bell on the nightstand trembled without ringing, as if sound were afraid of being called by mistake. I put one hand out under the quilt until my fingers touched Brielle's wrist. Warm. Present. Astonishing. Morning, I said, because sometimes the only weapon you have is the word that belongs to the living. The girl's head tipped the other way. The mirror showed her mouth. Try the shape. Morning. A pressure gathered under the bed like water, deciding on a direction. The mattress rose half an inch and settled again, as if something beneath had adjusted its shoulders. Brielle stopped breathing so long, I had to remind her how by doing it myself. In. Out. Then, so quiet, I'd almost thought I'd dreamed it. She said to the air, not mine. The bed didn't move again. The girl did not vanish. She stood there until 3:20, until whatever law governs 3:13 relaxed. And then she unlearned shape and left us with the smell of damp ribbon. We lay there until our chests remembered what finished breaths feel like. Brielle finally whispered, I will never tell anyone what I saw, because they would not deserve it. You can tell Joel, I said. And we both smiled into the dark, even though the dark did not want us to. In the morning, Brielle's palm had a faint dust print across it, like a small hand had held on for practice. She washed it under my tap and didn't look at me while the water ran. "She's heavier than she looks," she said. "Grief always is," I said. The footprint dent returned on the 9th morning. On the 10th, it had a twin, both facing the bed, as if the absence of weight wanted to leave a record. I pulled up the rug a little and found nothing but wood that remembered boots and spilled coffee. On a nerve I didn't know I had. I tapped along the floor until one plank answered with a hollower note, a belly instead of a throat. There was, of course, a crawl space access behind the dresser, the kind of square door that looks smug. I'd never opened it, because the human body can only accommodate so many varieties of fear, and I had prioritized Night Girl over things with more legs than names. I pried the latch with a butter knife, because sometimes dignity is a garnish. The door unsealed with a sigh and a smell like wet paper. I aimed my phone's light into the rectangle and saw dust doing its slow work, webbing like thread that failed to become clothing, and, at the far side, a strip of pale yellow. Ribbon. The same narrow width. The same tired color. The same suggestion of fingers. I should have closed the door and put furniture over it, and declared victory in a language that doesn't require facts. I went in anyway. The crawl space had the mean height of regret. I made myself small and crab walked to the ribbon and found it nailed to the joist by a tack, taut, as if someone had been measuring a distance that had no decimals. Beside it, in the dust, lay a bent bedrail brace, the kind that keeps metal frames from wobbling, the kind you'd find under a cot in a room with wire in the window. There was writing on the joist. Not carved, not marker, something rubbed in like charcoal. 2 letters at a slant. KL. Kenya Lake. I said in my head and not my mouth. Saying is a door. A small sound moved the air, a scuttle or a slide, and every nerve in my legs learned its own name. I thought of Joel's rule about not giving the dark the satisfaction of hearing you cuss. I backed out slow, ribbon left where it was, because not everything you find is an invitation. When I shut the little door, the house exhaled like it had asked me a question, and I had answered correctly. That night, the bed did not move. The girl stood at the foot and watched the place where the crawl space hid like no furniture could lie to her. Up, she said after a long silence. No, I said. And then, because I'd learned from Miss Loretta how to give nothing well, I added, sleep. The mirror showed the word make a shape in the room. The girl tilted her head, as if listening for the rules inside the sound. She didn't try the bed again. She didn't vanish either. She stood there and practiced not taking. At 3:20, she was gone so thoroughly. The air felt like it had been steamed. On the 13th night, after Brielle's witness, something changed the way the room balances on itself. Not a storm, not the trains. A kind of a quiet that my body read as test. I had left the door open and the bell on the nightstand and the quilt over my legs and the mirror cleaned so well it held the hallway like a mouthful of water. I do not know what made me turn the lamp off after weeks of refusing that. Maybe the part of me that wanted to stop arguing with darkness. The bed moved before 3:13. At 3:11, The mattress shuddered half an inch forward, as if surprised by its own obedience. At 3:12, a breath found my ankles that was not air. It was like the memory of being held in a line where children walk 2 by 2. At 3:13, my name came into the room like it already belonged there. "Nia," the girl said, and behind it, braided so tight I almost missed it, a second voice said, "Kenya." I felt it the way you feel thunder through your feet. Echo and call, mirror and mouth. The lamp was off, but light exists in more ways than we give words to. In the mirror, shapes gathered. Not rows, not a crowd, just the suggestion that someone else had learned to stand beside the girl, that standing could be community. My throat wanted to speak, to say her name and give her the dignity of being pointed to. I put my tongue behind my teeth and held it there like a padlock. The girl pressed her hands to the end of the bed and leaned. The quilt held. The bell trembled again, without ringing. In the mirror, the outline of another child flickered and steadied. Older, maybe, or only dressed that way. Behind them, that room with wire and rails showed itself in a thin slice, the width of a ribbon. "Say it," the air whispered. Not in the girl's voice, not in anyone's particular. The house asking to be reminded of what it had contained. "No," I said, and my voice shook. "Not mine." For the first time, the girl reacted as if I had taken something from her instead of refusing to give. Her head dropped a fraction. Her hands lifted off the bed and hovered there like birds deciding how to land. A sound like a smaller thing crying without breath slipped into the room and then left, embarrassed. The mirror did a thing I will be trying to describe for the rest of my life. It reached forward. Not physically. No glass passed into air. But the frame of it, the fact of it, leaned. The hallway warped around it the way heat smears a road. For a heartbeat, the mirror and the door beneath it were the same shape of permission. Pastor Denise had said, "There are 3 stories." This felt like the 4th, the one the house tells itself. I did not ring the bell. I did not say, "Kenya." I said, "Morning." And then, because I mean to be alive long enough to be stubborn, I added, "Go." The bed slid back the smallest measure, as if compliance could be practiced too. The outline in the mirror stepped backward into a shape of corridor I didn't recognize. And for the first time, I saw a door where the wire window had been. It was open. The opening did not show a field. It showed nothing the way a wound shows skin learning to be scar. The girl at the foot of the bed watched that door the way the living look at oceans. At 3:20, she unmade herself, and the room remembered air again. I did not sleep for a long time. When I did, I dreamed of a door I could not close, and woke with my hand holding the bell, and no memory of having reached for it. There is a difference between superstition and a ritual you can walk without hurting your feet. Joel's voice in my head said, "Do not go looking for night with day in your hands." So I waited until the hour just before dawn, when the sky remembers blue. I took the mirror down. It felt wrong, even as it felt right. Like borrowing a voice. Like taking a photograph to meet its subject. I carried it down the hallway and into the bedroom and leaned it against the foot of the bed, where the quilt fell in a soft lip. I propped it with books so it would not slip and break into the kind of luck no one needs. I stood at the head of the bed and looked at myself, being a person who had done this. The mirror showed me softer than I felt, as if it knew I was practicing being brave and wanted to honor the rehearsal. Behind my reflection, the doorway yawned, and the hallway checked its light like a watch. I waited until 5:02, when birds begin petitioning the day. I said, into the quiet, to the room, to the mirror, to the air that had learned my ankles, I'm going to the park. I carried the mirror to the car like a fragile living thing and drove to the place where St. Bridget's had once been busy with other people's decisions. Fog sat in the grass, like something that couldn't afford rent elsewhere. A jogger waved and ran past, and the world kept being what it is when you're doing a strange thing in it. I sat the mirror at the base of the tree where we had buried the ribbon. The trunk took its own time agreeing to be witness. "Morning," I said, and the mirror gave it back to me with a thin tremor that was not echo exactly. I waited. I watched a squirrel make the best of a bad plan. I listened for the sound of children, living ones, but the hour was too early. And then the mirror did the second most impossible thing I have ever seen it do. The first was in my hall. It filled with room. Not my room, not the bedroom where the quilt learned to be armor, but a space with soft walls and soft chairs, and a window without wire, and the kind of light you only get when people expect to be forgiven. It was a visiting room, the sort you see in institutions when they want to pretend not to be institutions. And there on a chair was a pair of uneven braids belonging to no one anymore, and everyone always. The child did not step out. That is not how this works. She looked at herself, looking at the idea of a door. She put her hands in her lap, the way she must have been told to. Then she lifted one, the left, and smoothed a braid, and looked at me through me. "Morning," she said. Everything in me that had been clenched, unclenched in a way that did not make me weak. It made me hear. "Morning," I said. And then, because this was the only time I thought it might be permitted, because she had said it to me first the way a gift should come, I said, "Kenya." The mirror did not break. The sky did not fold. A breeze made a small decision, and the leaves agreed. The visiting room in the glass grew brighter. Not sunlight, attention. The girl tipped her head, and for one breath, the outline behind her in the mirror became not a corridor, and not a cot, and not a door, and not a field, but a ribbon of road, with no one on it, and no wire anywhere. She stood, or she remembered standing. She looked down once, as if to check whether she was stepping on anyone's name. And then, the image in the glass thinned to trees, and my face, and the park being itself. I left the mirror there for a full hour, while day decided to be undeniable. When I picked it up, it was heavier than before. Not cursed, not blessed, filled. Back home, I hung it again. It lay against the wall, as if it had always been happier there. That night, at 3:13, the bed did not move. A breath did not touch my ankles. The bell did not anticipate its own ringing, and the quilt did not have to remember me. You do not break a haunting like a bottle. you set it down like a bucket of water and decide not to carry it upstairs anymore. Some nights, I wake at 3:13 because the body keeps the hours it's taught. I lie there with my feet close to the edge and say, "Morning." Like a tooth, I'm checking for looseness. Sometimes I hear the house breathe back the old breath, and sometimes it remembers air instead. A week after the mirror and the park, Pastor Denise came by with Sister Mira and Miss Loretta and Malik, because joy in black neighborhoods often arrives with witnesses and covered dishes. We ate peach cobbler and argued kindly about whether ghosts are their own weather. No one mentioned Kenya, except to pass the jar of tea, as if that counted. Later, alone, I swept the hallway, because sweeping calms me when endings pretend to be neat. The mirror held me like a photograph you choose not to frame. For half a second, less, it also held a small girl smoothing her hair in what was either a habit or a farewell. I didn't turn. I let the seeing be enough. On the first cold night of fall, wind got into the siding and made it talk. I tucked the quilt around my legs and thought about the rules people teach. Don't whistle after dark. Don't answer when water calls. Don't feed what does not eat. I added my own. Keep the door open so leaving feels like a choice. Clean the mirror so the living can be seen. Say not mine with kindness. Share biscuits. Do not let fear be your only furniture. At 3:13, I woke because there was nothing to wake to, which is a luxury. I put one foot over the edge of the bed, not to tempt anything, but to remind my body of its range. The air was just air, cold, honest, uninterested. "Morning," I said. And from the hallway, where the mirror watched the light think about its day, a child's voice said it back, clear, plain, like a bell rung by hand. "Morning." The floor did not tilt. The house did not lean. The world did not change its mind. I lay back down and fell asleep, with my hand on the quilt and my name in my mouth, where it belongs. When people ask later what cured it, I tell them nothing does. I tell them nothing is a gift if you give it right. I tell them there was a girl at the foot of my bed who learned the word morning and left a ribbon in the ground and a dent in the air, and that both are maps. I tell them it's a good house. It doesn't like being empty. And if I feel breath at my ankles one day, when I'm old and alone and ready to be scared again, I will say, "Not mine," in a voice that has spent itself wisely. And if something laughs once in the dark, small and surprised, I will not laugh back. I will sleep, because I have learned which hours belong to the living, and I intend to keep them.
Thank you for listening to The Storyteller's Moon. If this story touched you, scared you, or kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps the stories alive, and I can't wait to share the next one with you under the moonlight. Until then, may your nights be safe and your dreams unforgettable.